Good evening, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Allow me to welcome everyone on behalf of the Embassy of Hungary in Bratislava. I am the Deputy Head of the Mission, Miklós Márvány, and I'm very happy that you all made it today. The title of our panel discussion today, Key, the Future of Europe, the Western Balkans in Focus, implies two things. One is that the region of the Western Balkans will be in the focus at this event. And secondly, that we organize this discussion in the frame of the so-called Conference on the Future of Europe. Before introducing our panelists, allow me a few words to elaborate both aspects. The Hungarian Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade has decided that apart from the domestic events of the conference, we would contribute to it by organizing events through our embassies in European capitals. And this way, we are able to present the Hungarian view on certain topics and also on channel the opinion of representatives and citizens of the host countries, creating a broader dialogue. Choosing the topic of the situation of the Western Balkans seems quite obvious and an easy topic when it comes to the foreign policy priorities of both Slovakia and Hungary. And honestly, I do not really expect a heated discussion between our panelists when they present their country's position on the Western Balkan region. At the same time, I think it's very justified and well-founded to talk about the enlargement of the EU when we discuss the future of the continent. The countries of the region belong to Europe historically, geographically, and culturally. After the difficult decades of the 20th century, it is a common interest of both the countries of the Western Balkans and of the European Union that the integration process speeds up and is concluded as soon as possible. The P4 countries, and especially Hungary and Slovakia in it, consider this goal to be crucial in terms of the stability of the region and as a way to strengthen the EU against multiple security and economic challenges as a whole. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm very grateful that our two very respected panelists have accepted our invitation and will share their views with us. Let me welcome, on behalf of the Hungarian government, Mr. András Klein, Head of Department for Western Balkans, Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade. Mr. Klein has served as an ambassador to Sofia between 2012 and 16, and before that he worked in different leading positions in the ministry as well as in the Foreign Affairs Committee of the Hungarian Parliament. On behalf of the Research Center of the Slovak Foreign Policy Association, let me welcome its director, Mr. Tomáš Strážay. Mr. Strážay does not really need introduction to the Slovak audience. However, it is worthy to mention that prior his long years at the SFPA, he served as a deputy director and the head of the Central and Southeastern Europe Research Program. He was also the editor of the quarterly International Issues and Slovak Foreign Policy Affairs. And he's a leading expert in projects focused on regional cooperation in Central Europe and EU enlargement. He's one of the founders also of the Think Visegrad B4 think tank platform. Finally, but also very gratefully, I would like to thank for the cooperation to the Institute for Foreign Affairs and Trade in Hungary, especially to Mr. Ferenc Németh, who took up on the role of the moderator of the today's discussion. Mr. Németh holds a master's degree in international relations from Corvinus University of Budapest. Currently, he is participating in the interdisciplinary joint master's program in Southeast European Studies at the University of Graz and University of Belgrade. Besides his studies, he was a lecturer at the Eötvös József College. And in addition, he gained experience as an editor and journalist at Balkan Express column of the Figyelő newspaper and as an intern within the press office of EULEX Kosovo 2019. His fields of research include the politics, security, and Euro-Atlantic integration of the Western Balkans. Ladies and gentlemen, I will now give the virtual floor to Mr. Németh and our panelists. And after the discussion, I believe there will be room also for a short Q&A section. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Miklós, for your kind words and introductions. I will take the floor, or should I say the Zoom from here. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, dear distinguished guests, colleagues and friends. I'm Ferenc Németh from IFAT, and I will be moderating this discussion on the Western Balkans. This year, the region faced and still faces many challenges. The coronavirus pandemic is just being one of those challenges. These main challenges include, for example, the lack of process in the Belgrade-Pristina dialogue, the multiple crises that Bosnia and Herzegovina has to face with, or the lack of EU integration process for Albania and North Macedonia. In the meantime, on the EU as well as on the European levels, changes have also taken place or might take place in the near future. We have a new German leadership. The French EU presidency begins next month, and there is going to be elections in France as well. And those events will definitely have an impact on the region and on the Western Balkans EU bid as well. These issues, challenges, and topics provide us with a good opportunity today to discuss timely events and the importance of supporting the Western Balkans and their EU integration path. Today, we are going to discuss these enlargement-related issues from the standpoints of two Visegrad countries, two neighboring countries, that is Slovakia and Hungary. Before we begin our discussion, I would like to turn to the audience and announce that there is going to be an opportunity to have your comments and questions heard. If you have a question during the discussion, please use the chat box or the Q&A box below and submit your questions so we can reflect on them either during the moderated discussion or during the Q&A session. So back to the Western Balkans, Hungary and Slovakia. For over the last years and last decades, the Visegrad Group has been one of the biggest, if not the biggest supporter of the EU enlargement over the Western Balkans, not just as a group of 4 countries, but the 4 countries also individually demonstrated their support for the region. And now I would like to ask our panelists, András and Tomáš, to elaborate on their countries' views on enlargement first. Why does it matter for Hungary and for Slovakia to have the Western Balkans incorporated to the EU? And why does it matter to these Visegrad states exactly to have a clear EU enlargement perspective for the Western Balkans 6? András and Tomáš, I will give you the floor now for the first question. And András, feel free to start answering this question.
Okay, so first of all, I would like to thank you for the invitation and to thank you for the opportunity to my embassy that they have invited me to take part in this discussion. In the case of Hungary, the reasons why the Western Balkans are important, it's very easy. So we are directly neighboring the Western Balkans. So whatever happens there, it has direct influence on our situation here in Hungary. Obviously, it has its security policy aspect. So it's simple. So for us, the Western Balkans, it's one, if not the most important national security issue. Secondly, I should mention that for the Hungarian economy, the Western Balkans are important. We have a relatively big trade with the countries of the Western Balkans. And also for our companies, from the Hungarian companies, and for our size as a country or as an economy, we have, for us, relatively important investments in the region. Just think about companies like the OTP Bank or the MOL Group or recently the 4IG. So the stability of the Balkans is, for us, it's also important from economical point of view. Also, there is a Hungarian peculiarity within the Western Balkans and in Serbia. We have a relatively large Hungarian minority group, the Hungarians living in Vojvodina. So the peace and the stability of the region has also an impact on our national policy. I know that we have repeated it several times, but we still do think that if we want stability in the Western Balkans, the best tool actually is, in reality, it is the viable EU accession process. So very briefly, this is what I can tell you, that why this issue is important for us, why we are a like-minded country, and why we are not happy, but I think that we will discuss this a bit later, that this process seems to us to be extremely slow. So as an introduction, very briefly, that is what I would like to tell. Thank you.
Thank you very much, András. And now I turn to you, Tomáš. Is stability and economic performance play a significant role in the Slovak perspective about the Western Balkans as well?
I would say yes. Besides other factors, the Western Balkans has been the priority of Slovakia's foreign policy since many years, and it became really the official priority after the EU accession in 2004. So besides Eastern neighborhood, namely especially Ukraine, and the Western Balkans create one of the most important focuses of Slovakia's foreign but also European policy. It is interesting that today's debate is taking place in the framework of the debate on the future of Europe, the Hungarian part, but the Western Balkan countries were actually not invited to take part in these debates, which was perceived quite negatively, I would say, in Slovakia, because our commitment is to have, the Europe whole and free, so to say, which definitely includes the Western Balkans, and they were given the integration perspective a long time ago, already in the beginning of 2000s. So it's really some time already. And yes, why Slovakia is interested? We do not share any border with any of the Western Balkan countries, but we consider ourselves to be the neighbors of them. And this applies to Serbia, this applies to Croatia, but also we have had quite intensive communication and relations with other countries in the region. Just to provide you with a simple fact, like back in 2000, Slovakia, or before the EU accession, Slovakia just had its embassy in Belgrade and in Zagreb. Today, we have embassies in all Western Balkan countries, including Kosovo, where we have, the office, not the full-fledged embassy, but just the office, which also says a lot about how what Western Balkans means in Slovakia's foreign policy. Of course, the stability of the region is important. We have been following carefully the developments in different countries. We are aware of the role of external players there. So we support the European integration, but we know that there are also other stakeholders present there and pursuing their own interests, their own activities, which not necessarily should be in line with the interests of the European Union and also with Slovakia. The Western Balkans and some of the countries of the region have been the target countries of Slovakia's development assistance for a long time already. So since we were able, or we started to deliver the official development assistance, the Western Balkans has always been there. And I can finish by a little bit more critical note because economically we could imagine that the cooperation could be more intensive. So there still are some deficiencies when it comes to the intensification of bilateral trade and also investments. But I think it is manageable to catch up in this field, and it doesn't actually change the perspective of Slovakia on the Western Balkans and its European perspective.
Thank you very much, Tomáš, for your opening statements, let's put it that way. What was interesting to me is that both of you mentioned the need to incorporate the Western Balkans to the EU, and this must be, as you mentioned, also the interest of the EU as well. But strangely, at least in the last 3 or 4 years, or maybe more, we face this situation that many EU countries don't really consider enlargement as a top priority, or it is not high on the EU political agenda. Why do you think this is the situation? And can the Visegrad countries individually or the Visegrad countries as a group somehow influence their opinions on enlargement, on the importance of enlargement?
Well, I will start. Okay. So I will answer your question. In the first part of my answer, I will be a diplomat. In the second part, I will be make an analysis. I'll be an analyst, and to be a bit more honest, as a diplomat used to be. So today, maybe we should be a bit more optimistic, because yesterday, after all, the European, the General Affairs Council finally accepted the so-called enlargement conclusions, that finally we do have something, or at least it's a political message. It can be perceived as a political message. And also, in the case of Serbia, yesterday we opened a new cluster, so which means in the old system 4 new chapters. So something has moved ahead. But if we are doing our analysis, and so once again, I would like to reiterate that I think that it is a problem that today we cannot speak about a viable EU enlargement process with politically relevant successes. And we can see the consequences of this situation. So if we are looking around the Western Balkans, and you have already, Ferenc mentioned it, but yes, there is a political instability in Bosnia and Herzegovina. There is a political instability in the Republic of North Macedonia. There is a political instability in Montenegro. There isn't any important result in the Belgrade-Pristina dialogue, etc., etc., etc. So, maybe the lack of a viable EU accession process is not the direct reason for this instability, but indirectly it is. And I think that's a big problem. The reason of that, it's not the council, because today we have I would say relatively, sorry, it's not the Commission, because today we have a relatively pro-enlargement Commission. The text proposed usually by the Commission are positive vis-à-vis the enlargement process. What we cannot reach, or we cannot get the politically relevant or important results at the level of Council. And the reason of that is probably sometimes we have peculiar reasons, like the actual debate between the Republic of Macedonia and Bulgaria, for instance. But also I think that it's a big problem that probably in some important, mainly Western European capitals, the political decision concerning the enlargement process hasn't been yet taken. So that is, I think, the main problem. So if there was a strong political decision in some very important European capitals, I think that the whole process would be quick and with important results, and that could that this can bring stability to the region. So that is my personal opinion as an analysis. Thank you.
And Tomáš, how do you assess this topic?
Well, the coin has two sides, so definitely we have to analyze properly the situation in the Western Balkan countries as well. I would say that the instability is not the only problem. I would say the second problem is the lack of reforms, or not adequate actually intensity of the reform processes. And for this reason, I think the governments in the regions are, so to called, be blamed. So this is one side of the story. The another side is that, yes, in some EU capitals, the enlargement process has become a political issue, and it is quite visible on the decisions and on the positions of the governmental representatives of some of the countries. And the question is, why is it so? And I think one of the responses might be not really the expected development of some of the EU countries. For instance, the two newcomers, especially Bulgaria, for instance, has been lacking behind in the integration process, in the implementation of reforms, in the fight with corruptions, and some other can be named. So I think this negative experience also does have certain influence on the positions of those governmental representatives or political leaders. I also think that from the countries who have been supportive very much for the enlargement, together with the like-minded countries in the EU, should perhaps focus more on the communication with those who are more hesitant in this support. And I think that not all the instruments have been used. So the enlargement issue as such was put aside because of other issues that are perceived as more pressing on the side of some EU member countries, be it the economic crisis from 2009-2010, the Eurozone crisis. Then we had, Ukrainian, the case of Ukraine and annexation of Crimea, basically the war between Russia and Ukraine, which hasn't finished, migration crisis, then COVID crisis. So obviously there are actually some issues that need immediate solutions, and in such a framework, the enlargement policy was not considered as a priority, which, from my point of view, was and is a mistake, because the enlargement policy was considered as one of the most efficient ones. And it's somehow this reputation is gone. So perhaps we who are more enthusiastic about the process should try to communicate better and to convince those hesitant partners that it is worth to invest in it. But I would also underline some positive aspects. We have Croatia on board since 2013, right? We have a new Bulgarian government, which already perhaps is a promise for, for the ending of the bilateral crisis between Bulgaria and North Macedonia. We witnessed how the problem or the crisis between Greece and North Macedonia, at that time the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, was solved. So there are some actually issues that need to be highlighted, also need to be highlighted from this positive perspective. But definitely it is up to us to do more. And behind French presidency, forthcoming French presidency, there will be also coming Czech presidency in the EU Council. So the Czech Republic also belongs to the group of enthusiasts, so to say, of the enlargement. And I think that the new Czech government is not going to change its attitude towards the issue. So there is a chance to keep the EU enlargement as one of the priorities for a longer time, and it is very much needed.
Ferenc, can I just...
Yeah, sure.
Just a remark. You know, so it's obvious that the Western Balkan countries should fulfill criteria, and they should perform in the field of reforms, and nobody is denying it. The problem is that we have more and more examples that if they fulfill some criteria, or if they undertake some reforms, and after that they don't receive what they were promised. Just to give you one of the examples which bothers me the more. In the case of Kosovo, we, as an EU, we asked them to fulfill 97 criteria. Some of these requests were politically sensitive. We told them if they will fulfill that, then they will finally receive the visa-free regime from the EU. The Kosovar citizens are the only one who are obliged to apply for a visa. They fulfilled it. I think that 4 years ago, they finished with it, and still they didn't receive the visa-free regime. And we have more and more similar examples. So the situation is a bit more complicated. I think that the Western Balkan countries are not fulfilling what they are asked, and that is why we are not advancing politically substantially in the field of enlargement policy. And also, I am always cautious, and let us be honest. So very often we can hear critics toward Bulgaria or Romania. But you know, I think that generally speaking, the EU gained a lot economically and politically, and we are living in a more secure Europe because of Bulgaria and Romania, of the EU membership of Bulgaria and Romania. So once again, if there was a political will in some Western European capitals concerning the EU enlargement process, I think that many of the political problems or lack of reform that we can witness today would be resolved. And, you know, some years ago, if we asked something from some Western Balkan governments to do because of the EU enlargement, it would have happened. Today, and let's be as honest, so if we ask them, do this and this, make this and this law because of the EU accession process, we do not seem too honest toward them. And finally, we can hear, me also as a diplomat, I can hear very often the next one. So we can do today this and this, we should understand this because in France or in the Netherlands, in elsewhere, in Denmark, we will have local elections or parliamentary elections. I don't know, you know, so I always wonder, for instance, that we will have French presidential elections. And for instance, how many French citizens will decide if they will vote the actual president or not, depending on, I don't know, if the accession talks with Albania and the Republic of North Macedonia will start. So when we speak about political reasons to slow down the accession, internal political reasons in some Western European countries to slow down the EU accession process, it always sounds me a bit strange, and sometimes it seems to me that this is used as an excuse, and the same is concerning. So if we ask reforms because we want reforms, it's okay, but we should not allow to use the word reforms to use it as a kind of magic pretext why in reality we want to stop the EU enlargement process. So that is just some remarks that I wanted to make.
Thank you. And I saw that, Tomáš, you wanted to reflect on this.
Yes, as I said, the enlargement policy has become a political issue in some of the capitals, and it is used like an instrument. On the other hand, I also wouldn't actually agree with the approach that conditions the enlargement by the reforms, because these are parallel processes and the reforms do not end with the enlargement. They are supposed to continue, right, as in our countries. But I think the problem also is, and I had nothing against the word reforms, and I think we should sell it very straightforwardly to our Western Balkan partners, because there is a misunderstanding. They are not actually expected to implement the reforms for the purpose of EU enlargement only, or for the accession of their countries to the EU. They are expected to implement the reforms for the sake of the well-being of their citizens. So tax reforms, I mean, judicial reforms of judiciary, fight with corruption. These are issues that are not actually for the sake, are expected to be implemented for the sake of the enlargement itself, but for the future of the country. And political leaders, some of them in the Western Balkans, actually use intentionally reforms and point on reforms, on the lack of reform activities, just by mentioning that, yes, we got stuck in the EU enlargement process, and therefore there are always more conditions, which is unfair, I would say. I would agree with that. But they are playing with this word and with the implementation of reforms, and they are using it, this tool, as an instrument for their domestic purposes and for the populist policy making. So this is a problem, I think, and we should admit that. Otherwise, the EU capitals, yes, there are some who have been hesitant, and I think that it is not the proper approach by pointing on some of the countries that became the members of the EU after 2004. I just wanted to somehow explain why they might be thinking negatively about the quick enlargement process. So this was just the attempt to explain, you know, to provide you with the reasons. Otherwise, of course, I have nothing, definitely nothing against the membership of Bulgaria, Romania, or any other country of the EU. So that's my take.
I'm so glad that we brought up this topic, and I'm so glad we mentioned, or you mentioned, EU capitals, Western European EU capitals, because we have a question. One of our attendees is going to play the devil's advocate, And his question goes as some European politicians will say that the support of the Visegrad Group is one of the reasons for them to oppose enlargement, because they are afraid of democratic blacksiding, and that process might hinder rule of law advancements in case of the Western Balkan countries. How would you reflect on this?
Obviously, this argument exists, and we know about it, Ferenc. But what I would like to tell you, so once again, so I think that generally speaking, when we speak about the EU, I am not dealing in my ministry directly with the European Union, but on one hand, we can see in the European Union, which more or less, but it is very effective when it's about economical issues. On the other hand, we can see a European Union which is not effective when we speak about foreign policy or security policy. And I'm not speaking about only about the Western Balkans, but just think about some, I don't know, so the crisis in Syria. Did the EU have a relevant role? No, it didn't. And I don't want to mention other important conflicts, but generally speaking, we also can see that when we speak about common foreign policy, in today's world, the EU as such has less and less influence. We are not influential in the Far West. We are not influential when we speak about Chinese issues. We are not influential when we speak about the United States. And we are losing ground. And you know, I think that when Ursula von der Leyen, when she had her speech of inauguration, she was very right when she started to speak about that there is a need of a geopolitical Europe, and we need geopolitical thinking. And from geopolitical point of view, tell me, so when we speak about the Western Balkans, we are speaking about a region where we should try to endorse our influence. We are speaking about neighboring region, not only neighboring, so it's surrounded by the EU, and we are not able to resolve this problem, this geopolitical problem, and we are watching and witnessing, and we are speaking a lot. I have participated to so many conferences where we were speaking about the influence of third actors in the Western Balkans and so and so. And to link this eminent geopolitical question of the EU to some debates that we do have within the EU, I think it's a very big mistake, and it is illogical, and this is what the so-called third actors are expecting for us to do, because it is a clear evidence of making a successful and relevant common foreign policy. The Balkans is the best, because once again, we are surrounding the Balkans, and we can even not digest or resolve this issue. And it is absolutely our primary security policy interest, and it is our economical interest. And when we speak about EU's economy, I am very proud of Hungary, and I think that Hungary is a very strong country, but I must admit that when we speak about the economical interest of Europe, probably it's more a German or a French interest. But we cannot resolve this question, and when they are linking once again with other debate that we have within the EU, the question of enlargement, this geopolitical question, it's a pretext. So it's so illogical that I cannot think about anything else.
And Tomáš, how do you see the credibility of the Visegrad 4 countries from Bratislava's perspective? Can the Visegrad 4 be good examples for the region?
Well, just one sentence to what has been said previously. Another good sign might be the new coalition agreement of the German government, which actually underlines the importance of the Western Balkans and of the enlargement policy. I think this can make a difference in the communication with other EU member countries. Of course, EU is the biggest trade partner, or the EU countries are the biggest trade partner for all of Western Balkan countries. We have also invested there a lot, Hungary as well, but some other countries of the EU can't be overlooked, of course. We also actually, as the EU, do present the package or the assistance for fighting this post-pandemic development in the Western Balkans. The problem also is with the communication, that we somehow failed to communicate all of these aspects to the population and to some of the political leaders of the Western Balkan countries. When it comes to vaccines, for instance, we just lost the infodemic, we have to say, because the Sinopharm vaccines and the Sputnik vaccines are more popular because of more active engagement of Russians and Chinese in the media, in the social media, than the vaccines that were provided by the EU. But by number, these from the EU, the number of these provided by the EU was far the highest, actually. So this is another problem, the communication. And when it comes to the Visegrad group, yes, it has certain advantages. It's the only regional grouping in the EU, if I'm not mistaken, that has a permanent consultations with the Western Balkan countries. Every year there is a ministerial actually meeting. I think it's under the wish for is now under Hungarian presidency. So the question should go to András as well. What are the planned activities in the second half of the presidency? Of course, pandemic has had an impact on this, so perhaps the results are not so visible as they used to be 4 years ago under the previous Hungarian presidency. But still, this would be a good question. So I think that there certainly exists the potential of the V4. We can't overlook that the reputation of the group has deteriorated in some of the EU capitals because of the reasons that have been mentioned already. And but also I think that this shouldn't prevent us from communication on this issue and coordination in the aspects where applicable. And in this case, I would especially underline the role of the International Visegrad Fund, which is one of the donors supporting especially civil society projects there in the Western Balkan region. And I think that these activities should also be somehow mentioned. And the V4 as such and the Visegrad Fund have been used as an example for some of the processes of regional cooperation and also as an example of institutional development because the Western Balkan Fund was actually built after the example of the International Visegrad Fund. So the IVF, I should mention it because I consider it as a very complementary and integral part of the V4's actually possibilities to be present in the region and to actually help the region to proceed with the task related to their EU accession.
I will, Ferenc, if you allow me, just to answer the question concerning the V4 program for the Western Balkans. So what we are planning, and if the pandemic situation will allow us, so first of all, by the end of January, we will have the meeting of the V4 Western Balkan departments meeting together with our British colleague. So we will try to incorporate at the level of expert also Great Britain to share with them our views. And then in February, we are planning for February a V4 plus Western Balkans summit at the level of head of state, prime ministers of head of states. And one day before that meeting, we will have the foreign ministerial meeting. So once again, if the pandemic situation will allow us, we will have important meetings, especially this of head of state next year. And once again, probably it's 99.9% sure that the V4 will express their support for the enlargement process. That is what we can expect. And also, let me just, that I agree with Tomáš very much that the Visegrad Fund, it's a very well, it's an institution which is working very well. It's very effective, and we are very proud of it. And the Visegrad Fund has very good programs concerning the Western Balkans. And the people of the Visegrad Fund are the mentors of a similar fund, the Western Balkan Fund in the Western Balkans, whose center is in Tirana in Albania. So we are also mentoring a similar fund, the functioning of a similar fund in the Western Balkans. So that is what I can briefly tell you about the V4 support to all the Western Balkans as V4 and about the Hungarian plans for next year.
Thank you. And before I give back the floor to Tomáš, I just want to remind the audience that if you have questions, this is the time to submit it. And we are looking forward to answering your questions. Tomáš, I will give you back the Zoom.
Thank you. Just very shortly, yes, some examples of the know-how transfer from V4 to the Western Balkan region would also include the Central European Free Trade Agreement, for instance, that initiated here in Central Europe in the V4 basically, and was then, so to say, exported to the Western Balkans. So there is a demand and there is a supply on the other hand, which is a good sign. We haven't been so much successful on sectoral policies as a group because this is in the hands of individual V4 countries, rather, I would say, which is to a certain extent natural. It is not you know, closely tied institution, the Visegrad cooperation, but the coalition of the 4 countries that are willing to cooperate on some areas, on some joint areas, or where they just find common ground. So it's not a bloc or an institution. So it, but despite the fact that it has high flexibility, it has some tangible examples of this know-how transfer. I just wanted to highlight one more thing, and it's that the V4 is not powerful, so to say, enough in the EU to, you know, change the attitude of other countries, of those hesitant countries. And therefore, I mentioned the new German government and the new coalition agreement, that definitely Germany is expected to play an important part in this process. Neither Slovakia nor Hungary are part of the so-called Berlin process that was initiated in Berlin and that should serve as a platform for support of the Western Balkan countries in several areas. But perhaps we could find a link for cooperation between the V4 and the Berlin process somehow, especially due to the fact that some of our partners or with whom we cooperate on the support of the Western Balkan countries enlargement perspective or accession perspective, European perspective, are the countries that took active part in the Berlin process, like Austria, Germany, or Poland, which is even part of the Visegrad group.
And since we are talking about the V4's assistance to the integration, we have a question related to this in the chat box. How are the Western Balkan neighbors working on integrating the Western Balkans into the EU? And do the Visegrad 4 have any other security or migration concerns in the Western Balkans? The question goes whoever wishes to answer.
So, how are the Western Balkan neighbors working?
How the neighbors of the Western Balkans are working on integrating the Western Balkans into the EU, and do the V4 have any other security or migrants concerns in the Western Balkans? Okay, so,
you know, when we speak about the neighbors of the Western Balkans, it's a difficult question because it depends. Usually, I think that obviously the neighbors are interested in the integration process of the Western Balkans, and usually they are supportive and like-minded. However, sometimes we can see the rest of old or not so old historical debates, and today we have a very difficult and peculiar relationship. And once again, this is the example of today between Bulgaria and the Republic of North Macedonia, which previously was the relation between Greece and then FIROM, the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia at that time. But also we know that we have not an easy relationship between, let's say, Serbia and Croatia. So it depends. And speaking about the migration issue, you know very well the position of my government. So for us, it's to handle the illegal migration toward Europe for Hungary is a top priority. We know that the so-called Balkan route is there. It's a possibility of the illegal migration. I would tell you that today the situation is different from 2015 because there is a different Greek approach to this question, which is a key question. And also there is a different approach in many Western European capitals and also in Brussels. It's a problem. It can be a problem, once again, but the approach of the Western Balkan countries, so they are partners to Hungary in this issue. We are cooperating, our Ministry of Interiors are cooperating very closely with them on this issue, on this matter. We do have Hungarian policemen serving and making patrol in Serbia and also in North Macedonia. So that is what I can tell you very briefly about the migration issue.
Thank you. And there is a question that I think could be best answered by Tomáš, and it's about Slovakia's stances on Kosovo's independence. Our colleague from Pristina asks, what is Slovakia's position on the matter of granting visa liberalization and the recognition of Kosovo?
I would say that from Slovakia's perspective, these two issues are not that closely connected, because definitely we do support the visa liberalization process for Kosovo, and for instance, Slovakia recognizes Kosovar traveling documents, despite the fact that it doesn't recognize the independence of the country. The cooperation on different levels goes on, including the governmental level. I'm not speaking about non-governmental cooperation, which has been quite intensive. Kosovo is also one of the target countries for Slovakia's development assistance. But if the question is when or whether Slovakia is going to recognize the independence of Kosovo, here I can't provide a clear answer. As for now, the situation, the political situation in the country is that no one significant political party would touch this issue or would like to reopen it, unless the dialogue between Pristina and Belgrade delivers some tangible results. So this is the status quo. But again, I have to repeat that this shouldn't and is not preventing Slovakia from cooperation with Kosovo and from supporting its integration perspective, because this, from the point of Slovakia, applies to the whole region, and Kosovo is considered to be an integral part of this region.
Ferenc, I would like just to add, because the audience who are not in the V4 cooperation, just to make it clear, for instance, when we speak about V4 and Western Balkans meetings, we always invite Kosovo, and Slovakia never been negative or on this issue, and in spite of the fact that Slovakia actually is the only country which haven't yet recognized Kosovo, but it has never been a problem with our cooperation also with Kosovo, this fact.
It is also very positive to hear this kind of positive feedback from, let's say, from this point of view. We have another question, or let's say a scenario which is not as positive, I would say. It's about a scenario in which the EU loses its credibility in the Western Balkans to China and Russia. And the question is, how would the EU would explain losing the opportunity to tie the Western Balkan countries to Europe in case of the growing Chinese and Russian influence in the region?
Okay, a question. Okay, so let's first of all make it clear. We speak a lot about Russian influence in the Western Balkans, and it is there. And just, you know, but when we speak about Russian influences, Russian relations, we also know that it has its historical, cultural, or religious background. And great powers are great powers because they always want to be to influence the others. So we like it or not, Russian ties will be there in the Balkans, and in a sense, it's normal that they are there. I can, you know, but I can just answer one way. So, so if there was a viable EU accession process, influences which we would not like to see in our neighborhood would be less effective. It's not so complicated. If we are doing anything, it's normal that others will take advantage of this situation. So it's not such a complicated issue. Speaking about the Chinese influence, I know that today we must speak a lot about this. And okay, we had some spectacular influences, some spectacular examples of Chinese investments, Montenegro or in Serbia, but you cannot compare the Chinese influence in the Western Balkans or the Chinese investments, or for instance, with that of Germany in the Western Balkans. So I know that for other reasons, for a global issues, for a global American-Chinese debate, we speak a lot about the Chinese influence in the Western Balkans. But for instance, we should not exaggerate. The Western Balkans are not at all a priority for China. To feel Chinese political influence in the Western Balkans, it's not there. Mainly we can mention the simple fact that the Chinese are not recognizing Kosovo. This is maybe the only issue where the Chinese influence can be said, or the Chinese policy can be perceived as an important one in the Balkans. But we should not exaggerate with the Chinese influence. But once again, if we want European influence in the Balkans, let's have a viable EU accession process. And whatever, so people in the Western Balkans, even in those countries which seems to be a bit more open toward Russia, for instance, the best example is Serbia, but the Serbian peoples would like to join the EU. The Serbian people imagine the future of the country in the EU. Serbian people are going to work or to study in the EU. So, so the people in the Balkan, with their history, with their culture, with their religion, with everything which is peculiar from them, but they feel that they are part of the Europe and they would like to join the EU. So for them, even if emotionally sometimes they can say something different, but for them, there is no perspective, other perspective than Europe. So let us make it clear, and they are part of the European culture. So that is what I can say briefly about this issue.
Thank you, and I think we can move on to our last question, which is concerning supportive and not so supportive EU member countries towards enlargement. What can the EU member states who are supportive of EU enlargement do to convince the EU cautious member state to support EU enlargement? Or would you say that that's a job for the Western Balkan countries themselves to lobby for their case? How would you answer this question?
Well, I can pick up this one. I think it's a joint endeavor, I would say. The Western Balkan countries and their governments should prove their continuous commitment to the enlargement, to the accession, and the goals related to the accession process. And the EU, I agree, should speed up the integration process if the conditions are met on the side of the Western Balkan countries. And how to do that? I would say that the best issue or the best approach would be to point on successful examples of some Western Balkan countries who actually would be progressing in the reform processes and the meeting of the criteria, who would really prove to be the stable element of the region and stakeholders that would enhance the stability of the region. And I think that in the EU we have an internal homework, an internal task to solve, because this is $1,000 issue at least, how to actually communicate this issue to the hesitant or not really supportive countries. I would still rather prefer to call them hesitant, because once they are convinced, they would perhaps and hopefully become supportive to the EU enlargement. And we have different mechanisms for communication, both formal and informal. And I think that those informal mechanisms shouldn't be undervalued, like the work of analytical centers and the engagement of non-governmental stakeholders in the process, but from the countries that prove to be hesitant in terms of enlargement. So it's not really good only to import these ideas to the countries, but to engage local stakeholders and convince them that this is the process that is worth to be invested in. And one sentence to the previous question, if I just may. That's true that the EU should speed up. As I said, the EU should improve its communication strategy, because it's far the biggest economic partner, the donor in the region. But yes, the local people, I think, should also be aware of the situation that Russian and Chinese interest might endanger the stability of their countries. Look at Bosnia and Herzegovina, the territorial integrity of the country might be at stake. And I think that there are some proofs that the government of the Republika Srpska has quite close connections, not only with Belgrade, but also with Moscow. And when mentioning Montenegro, I think they have already learned their lesson, like this easy Chinese money that were put in the infrastructure of Montenegro. The situation ended up with the debt track, which is the real danger for the countries of the region, which are not that economically strong enough to pay loans and actually just be self-sustainable. So who is going to solve the situation? Most probably the EU will help and assist Montenegro. And I think this is also the commitment that is worth to be underlined, like the EU as a, stable partner that understands the region and is ready to help, despite the fact that the Montenegrin government obviously made a mistake when choosing the wrong partner, actually.
Right. So basically, in the end, everything comes down to the fact that it is the EU who should take responsibility, as well as it is the EU's responsibility to have a more active approach and not to be that reactive when it comes to external powers in the region. And we can only highlight the importance of having the Western Balkan 6 incorporated to the EU as well. Ladies and gentlemen, this marks the end of our discussion. I would like to express my gratitude to András and Tomáš for accepting our invitation. And I would like to especially thank the Hungarian Embassy in Bratislava for making this event possible today. what I can say before saying my final goodbye is that I think 2022 will be an interesting year, not just for the EU, but for the Western Balkans as well. So I really hope that in the upcoming months, we can repeat an event just like that to take into account what has happened in the Western Balkans or what has not happened, and suggest some proactive solutions from the side of Budapest and Bratislava to the situation in the Western Balkans and to the relations between the EU and the Western Balkans as well. And as a final goodbye, I would like to wish all of you, including our panelists and my colleague from Bratislava, a nice holiday season, and thank you for joining our event this afternoon. Goodbye.